Jer si milostivi čovekoljubi Bog i tebi slavu uznosimo, Otcu i Sinu i Svetome Duhu, sada i u vekove vekova.
In a world of shadows and secrets untold, where primeval stories make the brave go cold, mighty gods on high and realms below, whispers of legends that shape each soul. And nightmarish dreams, cryptids lurking, nothing's as it seems. Giants walking, angels and demons fight. Only truth can bring the light. Through the echoes of time, the tales unfold. Mysteries arise as the prophecies are foretold. From valiant knights to buried treasure, this podcast brings nothing but pleasure. Welcome to myths, mysteries and majesty. Study with us and don't be a travesty. Theology, mythology, fantasy and horror. From dungeons and dragons to Skyrim and Mordor. From powers haunting evening, in gothic castles where they're screaming. Wizards cast spells in the towers tonight, exploiting enigmas hidden from our sight. Archaeologists make excavations deep of the ancient tombs where pharaohs sleep. In the dust of ages we chronicles keep, storytelling's power of monsters that creep. Mysteries and majesty is the place for you to learn about this haunted space. From scholarship to manuscripts of old, unlock the secrets of wisdom and gold.
Blessed Friday, everyone. Welcome to episode 116. Back in April, mid-April of this year, we did a similar episode where we were dissecting the topic of Easter. So we went to those conspiracies, if Easter is connected with goddess Ishtar, fertility, and all of that pagan nonsense. And of course, we always go to historical and academic scholarly sources. You know, Shaun, what reminds me, there's at least one parallel when it comes to that episode on Easter and this one on Christmas, and that is that in both of these topics, both of these greatest Christian holidays, we unfortunately get Christians who are spreading misinformation. So in the case of Easter, it was this Reverend monk Bede. I think that's how you pronounce his name. It was Bede. That's the way his name is spelled. And now we are dealing with another guy who he didn't even live that long ago, who came up with this theory, with this almost conspiracy in his book about the two Babylons. Can you please give us some introduction and maybe some historical context? How did we even get this idea that Christmas may be pagan?
Yeah, there was a a guy. His name was Alexander Hislop, and he wrote a book in 1853 called "The Two Babylons." And in this book, he was trying to make the argument that all of Roman Catholic tradition that had built up around, as he saw it, like accretions to biblical Christianity, were actually just a continuation of pagan cults that had continued on through the Roman Catholic Church, and that the Roman Catholics were not true biblical Christianity. Instead, they were like a syncretic cult, like an amalgamation of all of the ancient fertility cults all together. And so he saw probably some of the most sacred images that we have in Christianity of, the Mary and her son as being like the typical image of the Babylonian fertility cult of mother and child. And and so he used this idea that he had that, like, okay, well, this plus this equals this, and therefore, because Babylon had this and Roman Catholicism also has this, they must be connected somehow, even though they're separated by 3,000 years. And so he assumed that they were a syncretic cult, didn't look into the history of how these things developed, and then tried to either find or manufacture, most of the time it was manufacture, data that would bolster his own opinions. And so he falsified all this evidence. And it wasn't really taken seriously by the scholars of the time, but it really shaped the fundamentalists, and it led to this kind of vitriolic reaction against Roman Catholicism, where instead of seeing Roman Catholics like the higher church Protestants did as maybe being a church with some accretions, or maybe that they had not done things the way, biblically, and maybe had departed from that path and just needed some correction, as what Luther and Calvin thought. Instead, the fundamentalists look at them as a wholly wicked cult, that there's nothing redeeming or salvific about it. And unfortunately, that persists to this day in a lot of fundamentalist circles, because they haven't got the memo that the scholars at the time didn't take his work seriously, and the scholars now don't take his work seriously. And the only thing they use it for is as an example of anti-Roman Catholic propaganda. Uh, so yeah, it's not taken seriously by scholars. It is not representative of many factual statements at all. Most of it's fabrication, and unfortunately, it has really tainted the way that fundamentalists see other, not only other Christians as far as Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox, but even some of the higher church Protestants. It really impacts the way that they see them, and so it leads to this idea that, you know there are only a few real Christians out there, and the 1.2 billion Catholics and the 800 million Eastern Orthodox are just, they're just not real Christians. They're part of some cult.
Yeah, it almost reminds me of how Jehovah Witnesses see that like 144,000 will be saved. Dude, what about just your own church has at least 5 million people, church/cult, but that's another topic. Yeah, what I wanted to say, it's hilarious how you can't have anything nowadays in Christianity because if you find any similarity to it that's preceding, Jesus' birth, oh, it's pagan. So yeah, a mother and a child imagery, it's now pagan. I'm like, and I mean, I understand the logic behind it, but I also don't understand. If you saw mother and a child in some mythologies, that doesn't mean you can't have mother and child in Christianity, especially when you read the New Testament. So how is that copy pasted from Roman mythology? I also want to give one more example, even though I didn't plan on mentioning this, but it just reminded me. So we all know about the Roman obelisk. So I just found this this apologetic short article written by a Catholic scholar, because there's so many conspiracies between evangelicals how this obelisk represents inevitably the pagan obelisks, before the times of Jesus. Therefore, this is another evidence, supposedly, that Catholicism is completely pagan and of the devil. So you have to, I mean, it's a short article. People can read this, but basically, I wanted to show the image so that people can say, oh, just because there's an erected obelisk and it looks in a certain shape, and therefore it reminds me of something pagan, man, everything is pagan. So I think that's a very shallow approach, because many times in life you can't compare something verbatim, like, you can't just do this and this. You have to get a little bit more into analysis, get the details, get the context, get the imagery, get the symbolism. You can use anything that you would like in your home. Let's say it's I don't know, I have D&D dice, or I can use my Arizona drink. I can use anything. So let's say police finds a Satanist. or a cultist who's doing bad things to his neighbors. Imaginary scenario, right? And they find the same dice over there. They same find the same drink. Doesn't mean we as Christians or I specifically cannot use it because some dude over there uh, who has criminal background and who did some illegal criminal activities did. But this is how our mindset thinks. Like, oh, this is for them, this is for us, and if we want to be separate, we can't think or have or do or drink or eat anything they do. And that reminds me of Paul, who was saying like, hey, especially I think it was in Galatians, like, why do you, he was talking to the Christians, why do you behave and act and think, in the same fashion that other people try to impose their laws and their understanding of religion and the Bible on you? So like, why do you live in this bondage of like expectation? This is how you have to live. This is how you have to pray. This is how you have to, do everything. And it just reminds me of those additions where, I mean, I will never be a Catholic, but we don't have to damn them to hell or bash everything that they believe. So this is why when you tell me about the mother and child, I was immediately thinking also about another thing. If they want to, connect, well, this obelisk would be another food for their thought. I don't know if you want to add something on this before we switch to the topic.
Well, just continuing in that guilt by association fallacy, Adolf Hitler really loved dogs. So anyone who works at an ARL must be a Nazi. It's one of those fallacies.
So I was just saying hi to Amber. She's chatting with your son. But yeah, I think that we can we can continue with with Hislop, because you started with him, so I think it will be perfectly fine to continue with him. So Hislop argued that traditions like, for example, Christmas trees. So now we're going to another thing that supposedly makes the bridge between paganism and Christianity. Like, oh, mother and child marrying Jesus, pagan. Obelisks, pagan. I'm not saying that he says that, but that's the mindset of many evangelicals. Another thing, Christmas trees. So Hislop, he argued that such a tradition of the Christmas tree found their way into the modern world from Europe, but that Europeans had adopted them from Roman paganism, which in turn appropriated them from the ancient Babylonians. We always go to the Babylon, of course, and because that's why he titled the book The Two Babylons, right? So Hislop's work has this, when scholars and historians, when they check his work, it's like, dude, you're seriously lacking some good citations for any of these assertions. So it's like you can make these assertions just like Beatty was doing when it comes to Easter being Ishtar. But today's historians, Christian or not, they don't find these connections. And I just wanted to share, because this is a big topic for fundamentalists, Jeremiah 10. So let's just read first few verses from Jeremiah 10 and exegete them together. Okay, so this is NIV version because it's very simple, plain English version. Hear what the Lord says to you, people of Israel. This is what the Lord says. Do not learn the ways of the nations, or be terrified by signs in the heavens, though the nations are terrified by them. For the practices of the peoples are worthless. They cut a tree out of the forest. Okay, this is the first, according to fundamentalists, this is the first sign that, there could be something about Christmas tree. So pagans, right, they cut a tree out of forest and a craftsman shapes it with his chisel. So we already see from the very get-go, this cannot be the Christmas tree. You don't shape it, you don't craft it, you just chop it and bring it in your home. I never did this, but this is what people do. This is how you buy the real trees when you go to the store. You go there, you buy it, you bring it to your home, you put ornaments or whatever you want to put on top of it. I saw people putting like Marvel or Star Wars things. It's not a sin. I don't do these things because I don't care. But from the very get-go, you see that there are differences between how the idolaters and Gentiles did in Jeremiah 10 with today's tree. So they adorn it with silver and gold. Okay, another difference. They fasten it with hammer and nails, so it will not totter. Like a scarecrow in a cucumber field, their idols cannot speak. Another difference, because Christmas tree is literally not an idol to anyone. An idol will have to be embodied by a spirit or a demon of a fallen Elohim, so that once when it's embodied and possessed, you actually bow to this entity and you serve. So your idol is not just dead, it's dead from the outside, but it's inhabited by a living spirit or a demon. So their idols cannot speak, they must be carried because they cannot walk. Well, that's not what people do with Christmas tree. You don't carry it, you just put it in your home, it stays there for a season, and then you remove it, you put it in the basement, in the attic, wherever. Do not fear them. Yeah, no one fears them, for they can do no harm, nor they can do any good. And I don't think we have to read any verses after 5. But Shaun, what is your, let's say I didn't speak my mind, and let's say you're a skeptic and you never saw this passage of the Bible before. Would you ever draw, just logically, just coming from this culture, would you ever draw an imagery and parallel reading these first 5 verses from Jeremiah 10 with today's practice of Christmas tree?
No, no, absolutely not. The way that this is laid out in Jeremiah 10 is obviously, as you went into, obviously talking about idols, and it's obviously talking about carved idols that are made to look like people. And the reason that they're made to look like people is it's assumed that they should be able to walk, but they can't, and they should be able to speak, but they can't, and that they should be able to do something either good or evil, but they can't. And so a Christmas tree, you don't assume that a tree can do any of those things, like you said. But it's supposed, like, the idea here is that they are crafted into the image, but they don't have they may have the form of the image, but they don't have the function of that image. So they can't do any of those things, and yet people are afraid of them. And so, yeah, I would never, just reading this, I would never assume that it's actually talking about Christmas trees. But because of the fact that most people's introduction to this isn't actually reading it, because if you're just reading Jeremiah 10, you're probably starting off in Jeremiah 9, and then you're just kind of reading through this and you're like, oh, okay, whatever. But when you hear some of the other, polemicists talk about this, they'll insert certain things in between the verses to make it seem as though it's absolutely talking about Christmas trees. Never mind the fact that Jeremiah was written probably, what, 800 BC. This was before the birth, like, almost 1,000 years before the birth of Christ, and Christmas trees became a thing, on the other side of the birth of Christ. And so it's like, it really couldn't be talking about Christmas trees. That's anachronistic. So the idea that someone would have this tradition and it's talking about it almost 1,000 years before it ever comes into place is just ridiculous. But they'll frame it in such a way that it seems as though, oh yeah, this is what they're talking about. And then when they say, oh yeah, it's a tradition that was carried on from Babylon, and then it went to Rome, and then it went to Germany. I mean, obviously, the people who are talking about this don't really know much about Rome's interaction with Germany, uh, but it went up to to Northern Europe, and then it caught on there, and then from there it infected the church. Like, I mean, pick up a history book, like it. This is trees carved up, and you can learn something from it, right? So I actually use it for good. Um, yeah, it's just ridiculous. I mean, and maybe I can touch on that for a minute. The I mean, people have heard of Hadrian's Wall, uh, where Rome built this wall because they couldn't go any further north. Because if they went any further north, they were encountering these tribes that would just completely decimate their legions. I mean, they were crazy, like berserkers, crazy people. And so, like, the world ends here. So we're building a wall because there's nothing beyond this that you want. That was the people of Gaul and Germany. Like, they didn't want none of that. And so Rome wasn't going to bring anything to those people, especially not in the way of trade. And also, that's not how Rome operated. Rome wasn't like, oh, we're going to spread our culture, and then if you want to be a part of us. No, they were like, first of all, bow your knee to Rome or die, and then now this is what you do. You participate in our Roman culture, because if not, you'll still die. So that's how Rome spread their culture. It wasn't like, oh yeah, like this might be a thing that you guys might be interested in. Now, it's funny that as I'm saying all of this, the practice of the Christmas tree in many ways did come from Rome to Germany, but not by the way that that this is painting. It didn't come by way of Babylon. How it came was Saint Boniface was the apostle to Germany. And so he goes to Germany and he sees these people who are sacrificing animals and people to this tree. This tree is like the place where the offering is made, and it's all bloody and there's all kinds of corpses attached to it. And he's like, don't do that. And they're like, oh, you have no say here. That's Don R's oak. Like, you can't do anything. He's like, I'll chop it down. Oh, you won't do that. Don R will strike you dead. Watch me. So he gets his axe and he goes up and he's goes to hit the tree, and some of the hagiography says that the axe shone like a light from the sun, and when it hit the tree split into four pieces and it fell down. And so and then he used that to build a church, because that's how badass Christians are. They're like, yeah, this thing that you use to worship Satan, we're going to use this to worship God. And then in the clearing, when this giant tree fell, behind it they saw a fir tree. And he says, now this fir tree, this represents Christ, because it points to heaven and its leaves are evergreen. So instead of worshiping your false demon gods at this oak, instead, these fir trees, which you use to build your house, because they used fir trees to build their house because it grew very quickly. That wood grows very quick. Cut this down and bring this inside. No longer will you go to the woods to worship a god who's outside. Bring it inside to worship the one true God who is where you are. And that's where the tradition of the Christmas tree started. It was with Saint Boniface. So yeah, it has nothing to do with Babylon or any of that. This has to do with Christ conquering the false demon gods.
Thank you so much for that interesting story and the historical context. I really enjoyed, and I believe your son, who is listening, he also did. But also, yeah, let's also, again, before we switch to the other part of the podcast, let's all pay attention. I mean, verse 3, you go and pick a tree, you cut it, and you're a craftsman. So now you're shaping it, meaning you don't leave it in the same way that people buy the tree and just put ornaments. No, you're shaping it. So the tree is now looking way differently. And then it's being adorned, not with ornaments. It's being adorned with silver and gold. So it's almost in a way, and it has to be fastened down so it won't fall. So it's almost like, this is how I'm imagining, and please correct me if you think it's different. It's almost as if this tree with all the branches would resemble a human being or a god with extremities. So it's like, oh, you are my God. I made you. It's not the God of the Bible who made me in his image. No, you're my idol God, whom I made in my image. So now the branches can resemble arms and legs. Well, legs actually not, because they're fastened to the ground so they won't fall. And I'm going to ornate you with gold and silver. So you're my literal idol God. And that's why you cannot speak. I have to carry you, because you're not just my gift to someone else. I'm not gifting you. You're here to serve my purposes. You are my idol. So how is this resembling a Christmas tree that is not chiseled? If you just put Christmas gifts and ornaments, kids wake up, whatever is the part of American culture, it's not part of my tradition, but whatever. You cannot butcher this passage, like Shaun said, that came almost 1,000 years before Christ, and apply thousands of years later, because they're similar words like tree and ornaments. That's it. But based on two words, people are creating a whole movement, a whole theory, a whole doctrinal statement that is simply false. Because if I take this book on aliens and this book on God is a warrior, and I find 2 or 3 similarities, like, hey, maybe the publishing houses are not that far from each other. Maybe some of the authors knew each other. And trying to find any other correlation, while there is not, I'm not doing myself another service. Where's truth in that? Where's intellectual honesty in that? There's no deep, honest academic approach in that. It's just like, oh, this and this, boom, let's place them together. Everything is pagan. Dude, if we start with things being pagan, you should drop your, when you're getting married, if you put the wedding ring on your left arm, you're supposed to put it on somewhere else because that came from paganism. But no one does it because you don't take that seriously. You're not thinking, oh, I'm getting married, I'm a Christian, I'm going to the church, I'm exchanging vows with my future wife, I'm going to put the ring on this hand, on this finger. No one thinks, oh, you're following pagan practice. No one thinks that, nor is God looking at that through that way. God is not judging you, no one is judging you. Yet people butcher this passage to say for people who like having Christmas trees, just like having festivities, like buying things for their kids, and saying, "Oh, look, this was condemned by God as idolatry." Where do you see in this passage that that's condemned? Because here, a craftsman is literally making an idol from the tree, an idol that will resemble either a human person or a god to whom you bow and you serve, and that's why you put all the best you have, silver and gold. You don't do it for Yahweh, but you do it for a fallen demon or a fallen Elohim. How is that resembling real tree that you put at home, play with your kids, and put ornaments like Star Wars, whatever, Marvel, whatever people like nowadays? It has nothing to do with it. That's why it bothers me, because people are not dumb, but they love being superficial, and they love spreading rumors and conspiracies that are not founded. So I'm not against even every conspiracy. Many of them happen to be true over time. But this is just approaching the Bible in a very superficial way and preaching it to others in a judgmental way as if it's true while it's not. And that bothers me, because we're Christians, we should do better. And I mean, I don't even have Christmas tree. I live by myself. My Christmas is on January 7th. It wasn't yesterday. But anyway, you use something so beautiful as the Christmas day to judge other Christians. Shame on you. Any thoughts on this before we go back?
Yeah, and then even that could be somewhat tame, because there are some Christians that will say, "Oh, a Christmas tree, that's an idol, you shouldn't have it," but they'll still celebrate Christmas. But then there are others who will say, "Oh, you can't even celebrate Christmas. You can't even observe the birth of Christ. That anyone who observes the birth of Christ, even going to church on the day that Christ was born, if it wasn't one of the prescription days that you go to church, is considered idolatry, because you can't do that. You can't observe somebody's or a feast day that's not part of the scriptures." I mean, this is really a problem with some of the Hebrew roots stuff that's going on, where they're like, "Hey, if it's not in Leviticus 23, you just can't do it. Like, those are God's prescribed days, and you can't do it." So yeah, it gets, the backbiting in Christianity gets really, really bad, and it's pretty dumb. Honestly, it's pretty dumb. If you don't want to celebrate Christmas, you don't have to. But I mean, Paul's pretty clear in Romans. You don't have the freedom to make somebody else feel guilty about what they're doing in good faith.
Yes, we see everyone is going to hell except you. When I say you, I don't mean you, Sean, but whoever is believing in these things. You don't do these things, but you do these things, you're going to hell. Or you don't believe in this, or you practice this, you're going to hell. You're actually supposed to practice, but you're not, you're going to hell. That's basically Christianity 101 for many fundamentalists out there. It's not Christianity, it's moralism and legalism mixed with garbage, with like personal bias and shallow reading of the Bible. So basically, I wanted to show all these memes. I know they're funny, but they're also sad, because you are going to hell for most of the things you're doing, even though God never said that you are, but that's your personal understanding. So yeah, let's go back to Hislop. So the earliest mention of customs like Christmas trees are actually ascribed to Martin Luther. The story goes that during a winter evening stroll, Luther was overcome by the brilliance of the stars in the night sky, painting the background over the evergreen forests. In order to capture that moment, Luther cut down and erected a tree in the main hall of their house, covering its branches with lighted candles. Santa, mistletoe, and many other modern Christian traditions may not necessarily have much to do with the ancient Christian celebration, but they do not have to be inevitably connected with paganism. Not everything is a pagan, honestly. Um, I have to skip all because we were enjoying this talk on the Christmas tree and Jeremiah 10. And of course, authors like, for example, Dan Brown, the Da Vinci Code, those documentaries with, I forgot the one that was so popular 15 years ago.
Da Vinci Code.
No, the one that has like a German word in it, like it mentions Da Vinci Code, but it goes way further. It says, "Oh, Jesus was a copycat of the ancient gods." I forgot the word.
Oh, Zeitgeist.
Yeah, zeitgeist. So people like that and Dan Brown, they're not helping because they're spreading misinformation to people. So it's like, oh yeah, I heard that, or I did my research. You did your research by going on a podcast, listening to a video, or reading, someone's opinion on their blog, and that's it's not helpful. So what is the reality? Well, modern Christian traditions are far less sensational and nefarious than all that and the day that was stolen from neighboring pagans. It is true that many other pagan festivals did happen around the winter solstice, but correlation does not equal causation, as we often say in theology. And when it comes to paganism and Christmas, the evidence was for causation is very weak. While there were other festivals taking place on ancient Roman and European calendars, these had nothing to do with the Christians' choice for choosing December 25th as the date to celebrate the Incarnation. The origin of December 25th as the date for Christians finds its beginning in the late 2nd and early 3rd century with the historian Sextus Julius Africanus. Africanus wrote a volume titled Chronographiae, an early Christian treatise that attempted to chronologically cover world history from creation to his own day. Based on calculations from his reading of Luke and Matthew's Gospels, Africanus concluded that Jesus was probably conceived on March 25th. For the birth, then he counted 9 months ahead, which landed him on the late of December 25th. Africanus was not alone in dating Jesus' birth. A contemporary of Africanus, Hippolytus, or I'm trying to read it, Hippolytus of Rome, wrote a commentary on the book of Daniel in the early 3rd century, in which he too states that Jesus was born on December 25th. So we already have two very early church figures who came up with the same date. It is true that Sol Invictus, the festival commemorating the Roman sun god, fell on December 25th. However, our earliest inscriptions concerning this festival place it at the beginning of December, not at the end. In his work, The Origins of the Liturgical Year, historian Thomas Paley argues that it is more likely that the Roman Emperor Aurelian moved Sol Invictus to December 25th to compete with the growing rate of Christianity. Uh-huh. So you're telling me that we have here a historian, a scholar who knows his stuff, and he says it wasn't Christianity that was stealing this Christmas date of December 25th from Sol Invictus. It was most likely that the Roman Emperor Aurelian did the opposite. Why? To compete with the ever-growing Christian population in the Roman Empire and to compete with Christianity and with Christmas because, hey, Jesus was not now one of many gods. He was the God, the big boss. Any comment on that?
Yeah, so there's two things that you've said since the last time I spoke that I wanted to comment on. The first was the first Christmas tree was goes back to Martin Luther. Actually, in the Middle Ages, they had something called the Paradise Plays, where they would have trees that would be ornamented with all kinds of summer fruits, and they would even hang communion hosts from it, and that kind of shows Europe and how they thought about things. But that would represent the tree of life, and then you would have a tree with like rotten fruit or whatever that would represent the knowledge of good and evil. And so this was something that was very common, especially in Germany and Gaul area. Like the Franks had this, and so this was really common in the Middle Ages. So if anything, all Luther would have done was move it indoors. But yeah, they had these plays because people weren't very literate. So the way that they would communicate the faith is through public communication of the gospel. And they would even have, I mean, they would even have beautiful parts of these plays where you would have Eve that takes the apple, and they would have corresponding music that goes with it that really communicates that this was a negative, really bad thing. And then they would have Eve hand off the apple to, a woman who would hand it off to a woman who would eventually hand it off to the person that was dressed as a Virgin Mary, who would then hand it off to Christ. And then you would have Christ eat the apple, and then he died and resurrected again, as a symbol of like sin. He's the one who dealt with it, which again, that shows the gospel to all of the people there. Like I wish we would bring those back. That would be beautiful.
I was about to say that's beautiful. I didn't hear that before. So basically, Jesus, by accepting that apple, he's taking the curse upon himself. He's the one who died, so we don't have to die. That's so
Yeah.
beautiful. And by the way, here in this first article, I'm just quoting Wes Heth, the Canadian apologist. So yeah, I'm using his sources, and then later we'll switch to some Orthodox priests. But please go ahead.
Yeah, and I just want to say, like with Luther, that might be true of like the specific Christmas tree. Like I think in Germany they call it the Tannenbaum. So like that might be true of that specific instantiation, but like the concept, the idea had existed from medieval times, and even as we said before with Boniface, the seed idea of the tree that existed even prior to that. But I don't think there was any, at least not anything I've read, there was no instantiation of like do this every December 25th. It was more of like, hey, this instead of this. But at least you have the seed idea there that develops more fully into the robust Christian use of the Christmas tree. Um, and then oh dang. There was a second thing that I wanted to comment on, but I kind of got lost on the Christmas tree thing. Um,
Is
what
it
was my
related to Sol Invictus and the Roman Emperor
yes,
switching
yes,
the date
yes,
after the
yes.
Christmas was already set to December 25th?
Yes. So Aurelian established Sol Invictus in 274, but we actually don't have anything correlating the date of Sol Invictus to Christmas until the chronography of Rome, which was a 354 AD calendar that had Sol Invictus on the 25th of December, and then also lists Christmas on the 25th of December, says that the liturgical year starts on Christmas, December 25th. And then in the back on part 8 of the chronography, it lists all of the counselors that have ever held position in Rome, going back like 700 years before Christ. And so it lists them all, and then when it gets to like 1 AD, it says the birth of Lord Jesus Christ in Bethlehem, Judea. So the first time that we have Sol Invictus show up that has a correlated date to the December 25th is in the same document that proclaims the lordship of Jesus Christ and that he was born on December 25th. So take that for what you will. But yeah, like you said, it was originally the date was early in December, and it was probably actually Julian the Apostate that would have moved the date later. And so there are different theories about which emperor it was that did it, but the idea was exactly as you said, to combat Christianity, because Christianity had already claimed that day, and it was, Christianity was growing immensely in the Roman Empire. So this wasn't an example of Christians borrowing from pagans in order to gain credibility. It was actually the exact opposite. It was pagans borrowing from Christianity to gain credibility. Um, and then oh, and you haven't gotten to Saturnalia yet, so I'll wait and let you get to there.
Oh, I'm about to switch there. So apart from Sol Invictus, which, like we said, was placed on December 25th, after the Christians already acknowledged that, hey, this is most probably the date of Jesus, of Jesus' birth, none of the other pagan Asian feasts and festivals fall on that date. Around that date, for sure, but on the same date, not. So, for example, Saturnalia was celebrated 14 days before January. So this will be mid-December, not 25th. Keeping in mind that the ancient Roman calendar at the time had 2 more days in their month of December than ours today, that places Saturnalia on December 7th, 17th. So, dude, that's like more than a week, 8 days before Christmas. What about a couple of other ancient festivals? And I'll let you talk after this. Well, the Brumalia and Bacchus feasts were likewise celebrated earlier in the season in late November. Seeing as all of these would fall before the date of December 25th, then if they were an attempt to copy and replace pagan festivals, they would have been doing a poor job, the early Christians, or as many times I don't know why, but they all love I'm talking about Christian fundamentalists and conspiracies. They love including, the Roman Emperor um, Constantine and his mother in this whole story. He's involved in everything, in inventing Trinity, and inventing Jesus' divinity, and deciding which books will be in the New Testament canon, and of course in Christmas. Well, he had nothing to do with any of these things. So the pagans could have just as easily celebrated their traditional pagan holidays in the days and months leading up to December 25th and simply tacked Christmas on the end, but it wasn't a replacement, but as an addition. So in reality, it was the Christians that had been recognizing to celebrate the incarnation and Jesus' birth for decades before we start to see firm designations for other pagan celebrations on December 25th. In AD 386, John Chrysostom says that Christmas was being celebrated on December 25th and described it as a long time tradition. The In the Philocalian calendar, a document produced in AD 354 for a wealthy Roman Christian named Valentinus, has Christmas listed as a holiday on December 25th. So we already have few people celebrating or declaring that Christmas was celebrated on December 25th, and it's been a quote unquote long tradition. So it didn't replace anything. It was actually, again, pagans who were either starting their holidays early, so maybe they will even touch on 25th, but most of them would not. Or we see their later change of dates to rival Christmas. Shaun, so when it comes to these couple of holidays, Brumalia, Bacchus, and Saturnalia, what would you like to add on this?
Well, the only one that really gets the charge of having been Christmas is Saturnalia, because that's the one that Alexander lists in his book is Saturnalia. And so, like you said, it was originally 14 before the calends of January, which would have been December 17th. When Caligula changed the amount of dates in December, because Caligula was just like that. He was the kind of guy who would marry his sister and appoint a horse a senator. He also went to war with Poseidon and decided to march an entire division up to the coast and start swinging their swords wildly at the water. Um, I mean, that's just how Caligula rolled. So for him to add 2 days to the calendar, like that was pretty tame for him. Um, so he added 2 days, and then what they did was Saturnalia extended from the 17th to become a week-long tradition. So it was from the 17th to the 23rd. But the latest date was the 23rd. That doesn't even approach Christmas. We're still 2 days away from Christmas. Like, you still have 2 whole days in there. How do you get from there to Christmas? There is no way to get there. And the earliest record that we have of the date being moved, well, not moved, but expanded from the 17th to the 23rd, is Macrobius, who was writing in the 5th century. And like you said, we already have the calendar. We already have we've had for, at this point, centuries, saints saying that the birth of Jesus was on the 25th. So by the time you get to the earliest attestation of the date having been changed, we've already had almost half a millennia of Christians celebrating Christmas on December 25th. So there really is no way to look at it and say, oh, we borrowed it from pagans, or we try to do this to gain credibility. And in fact, it's quite the opposite, because when you understand what it meant for a Christian to celebrate Christmas. Um, the celebration was nothing like the celebration that we understand Christmas to be today. Today, it's a festive holiday. Um, in the Roman Empire, there were by the time that Constantine was reigning, there were 135 days of obligation that you had to observe, uh, because um, every Caesar would make his birthday and the birthdays or the death days of his close family members Roman days of obligation that everyone had to come out and have an observance of. So Christians would refuse to observe that and observe Christmas because there is a claim that's being made there. Caesar is not Lord, Christ is Lord, and we're going to observe his birthday. This was a polemic against the pagans of Rome. It was not borrowing from any of their traditions. This was a slap in the face to the pagans of Rome, and they saw it as such. So, yeah, the idea that these Christians who are being martyred for their faith and would willingly go to be fed to lions and burned at the stake, the idea that they would capitulate and then take on a pagan holiday, like that's just ridiculous. That's just ridiculous. Yeah, these Christians were being martyred for their faith, and they were celebrating Christmas.
Good stuff. Thank you for that. Yeah, I was about to quote Eastern Orthodox priest Father Andrew Damick, who says just like what you said. He says when it comes to Saturnalia, it started December 17 and eventually extended through December 23. So how are people making connections of December 23 and December 25th? You may say, well, it's very close. Okay, it's very close. I mean, what does that mean? It means absolutely nothing. People are just like being silly. Um, Let me see um, some other pagan holidays. Okay, what about Yule? So just like the Easter connection, which is only made in a handful of countries with Germanic languages, because most languages use some variant of the Hellenized Hebrew Pascha or Pascha. This is really just about the name of a month getting associated with a big festival that happened to fall in that month. And do you really expect me to believe this is priest Father Damick asking us that burning a log in a fireplace has some unbreakable pagan connections that Christians just shouldn't do. Like burning logs is pagan? Question mark, of course. Maybe Christians would like to be warm too. I love his language. He's so funny. He's brilliant, but he's also very funny. Yet there was Germanic pagan Yule stuff. But Christmas has as much as to do with pagan Yule stuff as the 4th of July has to do with deified Julius Caesar, for whom July is named. And let's remember that Germans didn't even come into the Christmas picture for a good long time. They certainly weren't there at the manger. And then he's saying, sorry, guys, I love him. So, yes, you can have Christmas without anything to do with Yule. More Christians always have. Sean, any comment on this, on the holiday Yule?
Well, no, see, I disagree with Father Stephen Damick here because obviously it has to do with Yule. That's why they were celebrating Christmas in North Africa. Obviously,
Oh, yeah,
obviously,
obviously, yeah.
they took a Germanic day that celebrates surviving the frozen tundra, and they're celebrating that in the
Oh, yeah,
tropical
because
North
Africa and
Africa.
Germany always had deep connections.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean Carthage. So Tertullian was from Carthage. We have Sextus Julian Africanus. We have Augustine of Hippo, and all of these guys are attesting to the validity of Christmas and the veracity that people are celebrating it, and they're all in North Africa. So how do you get from the cold of northern Germany to the tropics of North Africa and get a cohesive tradition to go down there all within a very short period of time? And Germany was not considered habitable at the time, like for the Romans, was not considered a habitable place at the time that this was spreading south, because going to Germany was a death sentence. I mean, that's why Augustine, not Saint Augustine of Hippo, but Augustine the Apostle, to Britain was like, I have to go there through Germany. Like, I'm gonna die. He did not want to go. I mean, it's dude. Like, I don't even know what the train of thought is there. All of the early, like I said, all of the earliest attestation, other than Hippolytus of Rome, is all from North Africa, a continent away. What is the thought process?
Yeah, I love the humor, even though it's a serious topic. But yeah, we have to also include humor occasionally, otherwise we'll go nuts. So Father Damick continues with questions in his article, and by the way, I included all the articles, few of them, in the episode's description. So he says, "Well, is this about religious holidays in general?" And then he says, "The idea that certain days should be set aside for special religious occasions isn't unique to pagans. Ancient Israel did this too, and were even commended by God to do so. So when early Christians decided to start having Christian feast days, they did so originally based on the Old Covenant inheritance, celebrating feasts such as Pascha, the Christian Passover, celebrating the resurrection of Jesus, and Pentecost. Marking time with religious significance is not pagan. I want people to hear this. So if you decide your clan, your people, your ethnicity, your nationality, your country of origin, let's say today's December 26th. Today will be the podcast day. It's not pagan, it's just human. We like celebrating things. We like gathering together and having, food and drink and having laughter and talk and seeing each other and fellowshipping. It's nothing sinful about. There's nothing sinful about it. Father Damick says, it's simply human. That's what it means. Like, I'm having a birth of a child. I'm going to celebrate. I'm going to invite all of you, my friends, cousins, neighbors. We're going to celebrate until 2 in the morning. And yes, there'll be alcohol included. It's not anti-biblical. It's not ungodly. Again, it's just human. It's not sinful. It's not good. It's not bad. It's simply what you make out of this. So then Father Damick says, yeah, this is just being human being. You make holidays for you, for your people, for your descendants, for your genealogy, for whatever. To deny this part of our religious consciousness is essentially to deny that time and creation in general can be sanctified by the presence of God. Ooh, this is so good. It reminds me of some episodes, Shaun, that we had on the podcast so far when we were dealing with storytelling, with enchanted time, with how we can baptize and reclaim things, including time or symbolism for God. And because we want to stop here with religious festivals and holidays before we switch to the last part of the podcast, would you like to add something on this mini topic of religious holidays in general and God giving us free will and freedom to do what we want to do? So let's say today is the 4th of July. It's not a biblical holiday, but would it be sinful for me to celebrate it? Absolutely not. So can you please help us give some wisdom to people who are like, oh, this holiday is not in the Bible, sorry, and also doesn't say Jesus' birth, pagan. Can you please help us with this train of thought?
Yeah. So I know a lot of fundamentalist churches that would refuse to observe Christmas and Easter will still observe Mother's Day and hand out flowers to mothers. I mean, you're celebrating a fertility cult, obviously, because it's celebrating mothers, and in order to be a mother, you have to have had a child. So it's a pagan fertility cult. Like, that logic is closer to true than the Christmas is pagan logic, and it's not even in the ballpark. So but to say it's closer to true is just to say it's the tallest dwarf. Now, I really love what Father Stephen Damick said about us having punctuated times in order to celebrate this cultural identity together, because that's something you have to have. What happens when you don't have that is you end up very much like the broader American culture, where we really don't have anything that is uniquely cultural about us. So the only, I mean, we don't have anything that is intentionally uniquely cultural about us. So what happens is the hedonism becomes cultural, because you're going to be cultural. You either get to choose to be intentional or not, but you don't get to choose to be cultural. So the consumerism of America is our new liturgy. that is the way that we live and operate, because we've divested ourselves of everything else. There's nothing else that brings us together, that makes us who we are. So what do? We run into vice, because there's nothing virtuous to point to. And so for all of the piety that, these people may have been assuming when going into this, saying, oh, we're gonna cut off all of the accretions, that is the Roman system, and we're just going to be left with scripture. Well, we're 200 years removed from that now, and we live in a secular culture, because there's nothing beautiful about it.
I think what you said in the last couple of minutes is very important, because before that we're talking about mostly historical and scholarly aspects of all of these dates and holidays, pagan festivities. But this is actually very important what you said in the last couple of minutes, because you're approaching this from the excuse me, pastoral perspective, as someone who is supposed to warn people, love them, but also correct them in truth. So like, yeah, stop condemning and judging each other over food or drink or holiday. Isn't this what the Bible tells us already? So stop adding on things. It's already difficult for people to live with their guilty conscience, thinking they're failing God, they're going to hell, and now you have to add on this. Didn't Jesus say that His yoke is light? But people adding on all of these, extra commandments, you're not making it necessarily light. Let people enjoy holidays. They're not sinning. They have Christmas trees, so be it. Even if they have, colored eggs on Easter, see it as something where the new birth of Jesus is coming, and that can represent our resurrection. And you can use it if you exchange eggs like we do back from where I'm from. You exchange colored eggs with neighbors, with cousins, or with friends. You can even use it as a tool of evangelism and mention Jesus. So stop being against everything, because, I don't even care as an introvert about so many of these things, but I'm tired of people constantly condemning each other to hell. We're not even here talking about other religions or atheists. We're talking about our own people. And that's sad. Okay, I want to switch. We'll probably be done in 10, 15 minutes. So I want to switch to a dear apologist, Tim Burnett. I follow him regularly on YouTube, most on Facebook. So he was having a very short video discussing how people were saying, well, December 25th is connected with, some of the ancient deities. And supposedly this was stolen and adopted in the New Testament and just applied to Christ. So Christ is basically just a copycat of many of these ancient deities. And here in this short video, he was mentioning Horus, Mithra, Dionysus, Attis, and so on. So supposedly this is the story, but it's actually a conspiracy. It's not true. People who, and in this case, these are not Christians. Usually these are atheists, skeptics, or maybe members of other religions. They'll say, well, your Jesus in your Christmas, they stole the date from these other mythological creatures, such as Horus, Mithra, Dionysus, Attis, and so on. Because why? Well, supposedly all of these persons or deities were born on December 25th, and some of them even had a virgin birth. And somewhere around the year 336 AD, Pope Julius I decided that Jesus' birthday was December 25th. So supposedly it took the focus off of the pagan gods, and it made it easier to convert pagans to Christianity. They kept a good amount of the pagan traditions and decorations and just threw Jesus' name on it. So supposedly in the middle of the 4th century, this is when December 25th started first being mentioned. And because we want to convert Romans and pagan Greeks who then don't want, we don't want them to celebrate and worship Horus, Mithra, Dionysus, Attis, and others, come to Christianity, come to our church, and you can celebrate Jesus on the same day that you used to worship your gods. But that's not true. That's not true. It sounds interesting. It sounds like, oh, I did my research, but it's not true. So this is what Tim Burnett, our brother apologist, says. He says, well, so why do we celebrate Christmas on December 25th? And then he's speaking about his video, and he said this video would have us believe that December 25th was chosen because of its connection to pagan gods like Horus, Mithra, Dionysus, Attis, and Tammuz. And then he says, but here's the problem, and it's a big problem. There's absolutely no evidence that any of these gods were born on December 25th. So again, there's a big difference when you watch Zeitgeist and read Dan Brown and read weird blogs online and podcasts. versus when you approach a scholar and a historian who can actually cite your sources. It's a huge difference. So then Tim is encouraging people, he says, go look up the primary sources for yourself. For example, there's no date given anywhere for Mithra's birth. And I'm using the word birth loosely since Mithra came fully grown out of a rock. Likewise, the December 25th claims about Horus and Dionysus and Attis and Tammuz are all total nonsense as well. So then why do we celebrate Jesus' birth on December 25th? And this should be very important how the Jews used to think. So I hope this will ease the minds of our brothers and sisters who are so fundamentalist and they're scared. Well, this is why. It is most likely that this tradition comes from an old and odd Jewish idea that a prophet would die on the same day where he was conceived. And since they, the Jews, believed Jesus was crucified at Passover on March 25th, they believed that he was also conceived on the same date. So this is how they determine the date. So Tim Burnett he's not justifying the date. He says, I understand the Jewish thinking. This is why, I don't know why, but this is how they would think. If you would die on a certain date, then you're most probably conceived on the same date. I don't know why they would think that way. It wasn't in the Bible, but this was part of their tradition. Nothing sinful, just odd. And now Tim Burnett is saying, well, now do the math. Add 9 months to March 25th, and you get Jesus being born on December 25th. And then Tim Burnett summarizes, he finishes. He says, you might be wondering, is this Jesus' actually birthday? And he says, well, not likely, but we just don't know. The biblical authors were more concerned with what happened than when it happened. And by the way, this is not part of the article, but a lot of biblical scholars are coming up with some date in early September where Jesus was most likely born. So the biblical authors were more concerned with what happened than when it happened. Here's what we do know from the historical record. The December 25th date for Christmas has nothing to do with paganism, like zip, zero, nada. And then he speaks about the video that he produced, the short one. He says, this video also mentions other Christian traditions like the Christmas tree and mistletoe. These aren't pagan either. Ultimately, Christmas is about celebrating the birth of our Savior, Emmanuel, God with us. He's the reason for the season. Happy Christmas. And it's a short video, short article, but I found it so helpful because he attacked those misconceptions and theories, conspiracies that Jesus was born the same date as Horus, Attis, Dionysus, Mithra, Tammuz, but there's no scholarly historical record that this is true. Shaun, any opinion, any comment on this?
Yeah. So he's absolutely right. Yeah, there is no evidence that any of those figures have any ties to December 25th. With Mithras, I guess it would depend on which Mithras you're talking about, the Iranian Mithras or the Roman Mithras, because they were two different gods and they only shared a name. None of their story matched up. The idea of Horus, it would depend on which of the four Horus you're talking about, because there's four Horuses, Horai. There are four of them in Egyptian mythology.
There's four horses in Revelation and horsemen.
Yeah. And the idea that, okay, well, they were born on December 25th, and like you've probably heard, especially if you've watched the Zeitgeist movie or have interacted with any of the crazy conspiracy theories, that Horus was a virgin birth. Well, Horus was anything but a virgin birth. I mean, not to get too graphic, but there was some craftsmanship involved with the conception of Horus. Like it was not a virgin birth. I don't want to get too much more graphic than that. I've heard of people say Buddha was supposedly born on December 25th. There's nothing linking Buddha to December 25th. And again, it wasn't a virgin birth. The mother of Buddha, according to the stories, said that she saw a white elephant enter into her womb. That's not a virgin birth. That's an elephant. Like, I mean,
I'm glad there wasn't a pink elephant. I'll be concerned. White elephant, I'm not okay, but I can take that.
Yeah, I think that must have been Zeus playing a trick, and like he was like, oh, I wonder what's going on over here where they eat with chopsticks, because
Hey, I'll just give one quotation and I'll move on. I don't want to discuss on this, but Allah is the greatest deceiver. Amen. End quotation. Please continue talking.
um, and are you going to talk about Santa Claus at all in this episode?
Yeah, that's the last thing I'm about to talk
That's the
about.
last thing. Okay, then I won't spoil that. Um, but yeah, just to say that I agree with Tim that obviously none of these are connected. None of them are virgin births by the strict definition of the term. And so yeah, we don't really have to even consider these arguments. And if somebody presses you, you know, like, oh, well, Jesus or Christians stole from other pagan cultures, ask them for primary source material because there is none. There is none. I mean, the people who study Mithras will tell you that most of the information we have on Mithras is speculation because none of the primary source documents exist. Um, so yeah, I mean, like you win. It's their burden of proof, and the primary source documentation isn't there because not all religions were as meticulous about preserving their scriptures as Christians were.
Yep, indeed. Okay, so let's briefly talk about Santa Claus. So, of course, we all know the story that Santa Claus was actually Saint Nicholas, fourth century Christian bishop in the a location that is nowadays considered to be Turkey. But how is it getting mixed up with Christmas anyway? So I'm going back to Father Damek. He says it's because his feast day is December 6th, which is just a few weeks from Christmas, and thus during the Nativity fast, which is a 40-day fast that begins on November 15th. And like any good Christian saint, he did indeed help poor people with gifts, but they weren't toys or candy, but rather money to rescue people from being sold into slavery, etc. So Saint Nick did amazing thing back in the past, besides punching areas for his heresy. And yes, I'm serious about it. And did you know that in some Christian cultures, the home visiting, gift giving saint is a different guy altogether? In Greece, for instance, it's Saint Basil. And he doesn't come on Christmas, but rather on January 1st, which is his feast day. So, yes, you can also have Christmas without Santa. Most Christians always have. So, it's a short passage on Santa that he wrote. I didn't want to dwell too much on Santa, so I didn't want to be reading more about that. But yeah, as we know, this is actually a Christian tradition that comes with Saint Nick, who was helping the poor people, Christians and non-Christians, back in his day. So he would leave the gift many times. I would guess he would do that as an anonymous person. He would hide. He would just go home, mind his own business. He would actually do what Jesus was saying: when you do good, don't tell everyone. Just do it in as a secret, and your Father who sees will return it to you. Will bless you back. So yeah, Saint Nick, and Santa Claus are not related to Christmas. Yeah, for sure, we can say it's a later tradition taken from saint, turned into something, and turned into consumerism. Fine, but it's not evil, and no one is forcing you to spend thousands of dollars every Christmas. That's up to you based on your budget. God gave you a brain. God gave you to know what to do with your money, or you're at least supposed to. If not, take a financial class and learn how to budget more with money, but it's not evil. Who even cares about the story of Santa Claus? Honestly. So yeah, would you like to add on this?
Yeah. So with Santa Claus, obviously, like you said, Saint Nicholas. He was born to wealthy parents. He had a deep faith from a very young age. He ended up going to a monastery. His parents both died later in life. Before they died, he ended up becoming the bishop of Myra. Through the bishop died, and they wanted to replace the bishop, and so they're praying about who should be the next bishop, and a revelation is given to one of the people praying there that it'll be the next person who walks through the door. Well, St. Nicholas was a very pious monk, and he would often get up at midnight to go and do prayers. And so he walks in, and they're like, you're the new bishop," and he's like, "No, I'm not." And they forced it on him. He was like, "Nah, I don't want no part of this." So anyway, so he's the bishop of Myra for a bit, and then his parents die, and they had no other children because they conceived him later in life. He was kind of a miraculous baby at that point. So they pass away, and they leave him all of their wealth, and he does what any good Christian does, and he's giving it away. um so it yeah, the stories are like he would be sneaking through his little town at night, dropping bags of gold in people's windows. Like you said, the buying people out of slavery, there's a well-known story about a guy who's I think it is his wife dies, and so he ends up like losing basically everything, and so the creditors are going to come and take his children, and he doesn't even have money for a dowry, so he's wanting to marry off his daughters in order so that they won't be taken and sold into prostitution. And so he's praying that, God would provide for him at least a dowry so he could sell off his daughters. And so Saint Nicholas comes and he drops off gold secretly for the first daughter, and so the guy marries her off. And then he's praying for the second daughter, and apparently, Nicholas is walking around at night and hearing the guy praying to God that he would provide for a second daughter, so drops off another bag of gold. And at this point, the guy's like, "God, show me the guy who's doing this, like, please." So it comes time for his third daughter, and he's praying, and Saint Nicholas is a little bit more cautious because he knows that the guy's looking for him. So he tosses a bag of gold in, and the bag flies over the window and down to where she had must have had like socks, like stockings hanging, and the bag of gold falls in the stocking. That's where the tradition of the stocking comes from. And even in, I think it's Belgium, children still leave their shoes out for Saint Nicholas to come and put little toys and candies and stuff in. So it's not all like the American tradition. Like you said, there's different saints that deliver it, and different things. But Saint Nicholas Day was December 6th. And the way that that ended up getting brought into Christmas is actually on Christmas Day. There were no exchanging of gifts. The exchanging of gifts happened on Epiphany, because that's when the wise men gave gifts to Christ, and so they wanted to. The early church wanted to do that, and that was continued. So Christmas Day was considered more of like a somber occasion, but Luther wanted to have all attention pointed to Christ. So he kind of combined St. Nicholas Day, the gift giving on Epiphany, and Christmas. And he wanted, like I said, he wanted all attention to be on Christ. So there was a phrase, it was like Christ for the children, and it became shortened to Chris Kinder, Christ for the children, and that got changed, anglicized into Chris Kringle, which is one of the names for Santa Claus. Um, it's just interesting to see how these things evolve, and they evolve so naturally and organically. Um, Santa, or Saint Nicholas, was almost always seen in the southern parts of Europe as coming on a white horse, and the reason is because in Revelation 19, Christ will come and his entourage come with him on a white horse. And so the idea was St. Nicholas was coming back every year on his feast day on a white horse to deliver gifts. Um, in Northern Europe, horses are less common. And so, well, what is he going to ride? A caribou, a reindeer. And so that's where the myth of the reindeer come from. Um, it's like it evolved just so organically, so naturally. But it's all Christian. None of it's pagan. Um, and so I just think that, like, far from it being like a pagan origin to Christmas or something that detracts from Christmas, I actually think it's really beautiful the way that we remember Saint Nicholas, and the reason that we exchange gifts for Epiphany. I mean, Epiphany is one of the, I think it's one of the most overlooked days, especially for Protestants, because this was the day where the gospel came to the Gentiles, like initially, right? You had Gentile kings, kings that weren't Jewish, coming to celebrate the Jewish Messiah and bring him gifts, and they didn't leave Jewish. They left Gentile and still adored the Lord of glory, right? Like that's the that's the gospel to the Gentiles. You come Greek, you leave Greek. You come Serb, you leave Serb. And you're Christian. You don't have to become Jewish. I mean, that's Acts 15's whole thing. You don't have to be Jewish in order to be for Christ, because the prophecy was that God would take back the nations. How's he going to take back the nations if they're all Jewish? Then there's only one big nation. That's not the prophecy. That's not the fulfillment, and that's not what God wants. He wants the nations as the nations, which that was revealed, and I think in a subtle way in Epiphany, which is why it actually has an earlier celebration and an earlier attestation than Christmas, because the church understood what that represented. It represented the Gentiles being included into the gospel, which is amazing. All glory be to God.
Man, I listened to the story of Saint Nick with so much enjoyment and pleasure. Uh, we have prayer requests from our brother Mike from Michigan. He says, I need a little prayer. I have a hard time in life. I love Jesus, but sometimes I cannot read very well because I'm handicapped. What would be a good way to listen to God? Well, thanks for being vulnerable and honest with us. We appreciate you. We love you, brother. We'll pray for you. I can also encourage you that by listening podcasts and online sermons and teachings, you can also listen to the audio Bibles as well. You can download those apps completely free. You also have YouTube videos where people read Bibles completely for free, and you can just listen. If that bothers you, you cannot read. If listening helps you, I also did this through my college years. Sometimes we'll have to read the whole Bible and report that. I'm like, man, I can't read with everything else in full-time job. I can't read the Bible and do the homework and go to school. And they told us, professors were very gentle. Well, this one of them who says, well, if you listen, and you can listen anywhere, taking a shower, you can play the Bible while you're on, public train or bus, that will also count. So I would encourage you, Mike, get one of those Bible apps on your phone, or if you use computer, just go on YouTube and listen to audio Bibles. Would you like to add on this, Shaun?
Yeah, I prefer to use the YouVersion Bible app. I've had that for years, and they have really good audio. You can pick the reader, and each translation has a different reader, which is kind of interesting. And so, like, that's how I get my Bible in, because I work two jobs and I'm raising kids, and so there's hardly any time for me to sit down with the paper Bible. I prefer sitting down with the paper Bible and reading because I can go slower and study. But when I just need to get the word in, I throw on the Bible app.
Very nice. I hope this helps, brother Mike. And yeah, we'll be praying for you. Well, this episode is kind of short one, so we covered everything else. If you just plugged in by the end of the podcast, I would encourage you. Once when we're done broadcasting, go and listen from the very beginning. Also, let me just share the online school that is starting soon. I know that Shaun parents are interested in coming. Shaun, can you please confirm if this can be seen on the screen?
Yes, it can.
Oh, cool. Thanks. Because I'm seeing the screen, I cannot see what's happening in the studio. So yeah, this is expanded version or the new version of the flyer that I was working on today. So basically, we'll be having about between 12 and 15 classes, 50 to 60 minutes, 7 major sections. So systematic theology, biblical theology, historical theology, apologetics, intro to theology, stuff like that, how to properly do evangelism, presenting the gospel, and things of that sort, which will be all, these are 7 major sections, which will be all covered with so many bullet points, which will be 60 and more. So I promise tons of fun, some challenging stuff, of course, because that's how we are growing. Students will be asking questions. We may do some homework practicing how to properly read the Bible, differences between reading the Bible and interpreting the Bible. Then we'll learn how to do it based on genres, based on the context. We'll go in the history of the Bible. We'll go cover manuscripts. We'll go cover the Trinity, Jesus' divinity, harrowing of hell. We'll be doing a proper way of why and how to present the gospel to someone. So 60 of these things, 60 of these mini topics and bullet points that I'll be covering. I just mentioned several, but there'll be so many. There'll be no requirements when it comes to buying a book. There's nothing to invest except paying for classes. Um, People who get at least half of the classes or more, they may get a small discount. It will be done on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday evening. You don't need anything to pay to join the class. It will be done through the podcast platform, which I'm paying for yearly. So I would just send you the link. You just click, just you do with the Zoom, type your name, and you'll be there. I can host up to 9 guests. So, we still need like several more. Yeah, I'll be there teaching this eventually. I have couple of friends who have masters in biblical studies who are interested in coming as guest teachers, but that's coming later. That's a possibility. We'll see in the beginning how all of this goes. I've been working on the curriculum. I have so far 35 pages in Word single space. So let's say you're going back to school, all the professors tell you have to have double space. So imagine 70 pages double space. And I'm still working. I still have like almost 10 more topics to add and expand on. So I'm doing very meticulously. I'm doing very dedicated, with great dedication, passion, zeal, because this is not about making money. This is not about whatever. It's about me gaining experience. I've been already teaching this material before. But also helping Christians out there, regardless of your tradition, faith tradition, denomination, church background, to learn how to properly understand the word, to learn the root and the foundation of our faith, and to become more confident when it comes to sharing our faith with others. Not to argue, but when we talk with skeptics, with atheists, with members of other religions, to actually know what we believe and why we believe, not just, well, my parent taught me, my pastors or priest taught me. This will be not, oh, just because I'm evangelical, that if you're Catholic Orthodox, you can't join. No, absolutely not. This will not be attacking others. This will be, when it comes to the whole Christendom, one church, the whole global body of Christ, this will be beneficial for everyone. And occasionally, yeah, I can give you homework, but it will be fun. We can together read and try to dissect certain passages of the Bible, do the exegesis. Anything that may sound difficult, it will be explained, I promise. So yeah, if you're interested, here's my email. Here's also the YouTube page of our podcast. You can also comment under any YouTube clip. We have 800 videos, long and short, so far made in these 3 years. Whenever you comment, we'll see that. You can send email, we'll see that. When it comes to more information, such as pricing, the exact date and time. So yeah, this is all open, but I plan to start this in a couple of weeks. And I plan, honestly, to do this for years. So whenever we're done with class, with the whole program, I plan to start later. If you're late, let's say you heard about this weeks from when we started, so you hear when there's class 3, 4, or 5, you don't have to wait for the whole class, the whole program to finish and start with class 1. You can join whenever, because I did mention this by the end. You don't have to enroll in each of these 15-ish or so classes, because I'll try to make these topics and classes independent of each other. So let's say you missed the history of the church, but then we're talking about Jesus' deity. You can enroll with that. So you don't have to do all of the classes. But if people do, let's say at least 8 to 10 or so many classes, or maybe more, I will give you a discount, because it's not about money. It's helping the body, because I witness daily so much, and I'm not trying to be harsh, but so much ignorance and lack of knowledge and lack of using minds that God gave us to use as a gift in learning about the faith, proclaiming the faith, defending the faith. So if I can help, and I believe I can, equipping the body of Christ, equipping the saints so they can understand more the Bible, theology, religion, history, context, and everything else, with the tools that I've been given at school, with all the books I've been reading also for podcasts, and in my spare time, I'll gladly do it. So yeah, this is basically what I wanted to share, because my plan is to share this every time we have a podcast so people can contact. It doesn't matter where you're from. Throughout the country, you can, throughout the whole North America, you can apply, and we will do classes online. It will be basically a virtual classroom. So I promise it will be tons of fun. So yeah, basically that's it. Okay. I'm just reading comments. Sean, you have the honor, the pleasure of concluding this topic of Christmas for tonight. What is your message to the audience?
Well, first, I want to say that I'm jealous of all the people that are going to be joining the program because I just don't have time to do it. But I would love to be able to get in and do some homework and dialogue with a class of Christian intellectuals that are trying to deepen their faith. I just think that would be wonderful. Um, but as far as this episode is concerned, and Christmas, I think everything that we've covered has shown pretty definitively that Christmas, the celebration of Christ's birth, the observance of his birth, has very, very early roots in the church, predates the pagan observations that maybe some of our detractors would say Christmas is stolen from or based on, and it turns out it's actually quite the opposite. That Christianity came first, and because it was growing so rapidly, the pagans had to institute things in order to try to steal from our credibility. Um, we have demonstrated that the Christmas tree is not an idol. Jeremiah 10 does not forbid the use of a Christmas tree. That the Christmas tree has very early roots going all the way back to St. Boniface. That the medieval church used paradise plays in which they had the tree of life, which was ornamented, and that Luther himself ended up starting the tradition of bringing the tree into the house as a way of teaching the gospel to the children. We have talked about Santa Claus and how the evolution of the concept of Santa Claus came from the venerable Saint Nicholas, and somebody who is to be respected for his charity and his faith. And that the tradition of Santa Claus helps to remember that you don't necessarily have to lie to your kids, but it is something to it is important, I think, to remember those who have come before us. In fact, I think Paul says something about that, to remember those who instructed us, right? So in all of this, really, it's elevating our view of Christ, and it's creating almost actually it's a liturgical cycle where maybe we as Protestants, evangelical Protestants, are kind of bereft of one, where we can at least punctuate a certain time in the year where we remember that Jesus Christ incarnated, God came to earth, wrapped in flesh, and walked among us. And he didn't consider it to be below him to be counted among us, which is beautiful and breathtaking, that the God who created the universe would identify with us, and that he came and conquered sin and death, which started with a tree, and he won his victory on a tree. And I think that the Christmas tree encapsulates that perfectly. And so I just love the Christmas season. Um, I love it not for its secular purpose; it's more commercial idea. I kind of hate that, but I love the Christmas season for Christ, because there is an anointing on this period of time, and it's not necessarily because Christ was born in this period of time, but it's because this is when the people observe that the impossible happened, that God became man, so that, as Athanasius says, man might become God. All right.
Thank you for that. And I also forgot this Sunday, so this will be the last Sunday of the year. Amber and I will continue talking about the Jewishness of Jesus, because without that historical cultural context, we will most likely butcher the gospel message and see Jesus is completely different than so many rabbis and people of his time, which is not true. And we are starting the podcast Sunday in January with welcoming Spencer Owen back on the channel. He's a Christian therapist, and we'll be talking about church and religious hurt and abuse. So it'll be a very good, very deep, very emotional, very pastoral message for all the people out there. And I hope that message will reach out to people who gave up on God, on Jesus, on church, on the Bible, on everything, because someone hurt them, a priest, a pastor, either directly, maybe molested them, or they felt like they were not heard, or they were people acted too judgmental towards them. Like in this case, we're talking about people judging each other over Christmas, which is ridiculous, but unfortunately it happens. So we want to deal very passionately and very compassionately and very biblically and very pastorally when it comes to that episode, hoping to reach out to people out there hurting, as if this world is not and this life are not already tough. We don't need Christians throwing rocks at us. So yeah, that being said, please, if it's on your heart, subscribe, like. I'll see you with Ember this Sunday at 7 p.m. Central Time, talking about the Jewishness of Jesus. And then Shaun and I will come up with something more fun and more interesting next Friday. God bless you and thank you all. Take care.